Hello, my people. Good morning. Then welcome to my first webinar on network weaving for peace building networks. I hope you enjoy it. So by now you've all have heard me talk about uh, networks, about social networks, and about how I believe or I think that the network lens is a good one for us to look into the processes of large-scale systems change, right? Trying to answer the question of how does a small group of people uh, acting in a network or working with the network lens can affect a larger population, right? But now I want to talk about what we can do with this lens. Something that I like to refer to as how do we move from having a group of people or collecting a group of people that have many good intentions, and do we move from that to intentional networks, right? And for me, this is like the step when it gets serious, when we get committed to our purpose, to our main goal. This is where the group of people that have good intentions actually coalesce about the clarity of what we are trying to do and start structuring and organizing themselves to produce action and to produce long-term change. So this is going to be a series of two webinars. In this one, I will cover the basics of intentional networks. I'll have another one on the steps of creating intentional networks, and I will follow that with a video of a case study of an intentional networks, which is coming from Kenya and from the Wajir case study. Okay. So let's talk about what I believe are the minimum specifications. When can we talk about an intentional network? So intentional networks have a focus. They are addressing an issue or solving a problem, like organizing a region or a neighborhood or developing a system or a vision, right? So it's important that these have a very specific focus. And the participation in the network is voluntary. So you're not enlisting people forcefully. People are invited, or either formally or because they identify with what you're doing, and they voluntarily start relating to you and become part of this. This can be individuals, but it can also be organizations and other institutions. Then the third important concept is that in these networks, the people or the organizations which are part of these networks, they are peers, right? You may have to eventually structure and organize your network into a formal organization that needs a governance board, that needs some management roles, right? But the work itself that the network does on the ground, it is done together with peers. So you might have a person who needs to be the chief financial officer and needs to be a project manager, but then it's important that we view ourselves always as peers, right? Um, a network approach or an intentional network fosters engagement among participants of the network. So we don't have people coming in and unengaged or uninterested. The idea is that everybody who wants to join and can really be engaged and can be the partial owner also of the network. And finally, the network mobilizes action, right? The activity is structured around projects and around processes, um, and the purpose of the network is eventually then to do prototypes, to do small actions, and to do small learning experiments that all, add up into a long-term systems change process. Okay. Now let's talk about some examples of intentional networks, which I'm sure you have heard about them, but probably you haven't thought about them as intentional networks. The most common ones are social movements. They are about raising an issue and generating energy, right? We see hundreds, if not thousands, of social movements around the world, and they are very visible, right? They are very engaging, and they are very energetic, right? They organize. So in Europe currently, a very famous social movement is the Yellow Vests that are manifesting themselves every Saturday in France, in Paris, and causing some havoc, but also raising awareness for some discomfort in the population. Other types of intentional networks are advocacy networks. They have very specific goals and implement actions related to specific issues, right? So my first work here in Portugal, in this sector of social change, was with advocacy networks for education. So we wanted to change the educational system, the public educational system. Okay, so we organized some events, some meetings, some demonstrations, and we had a very, very, very specific goal, which is to change the laws that rule the schools in Portugal. But what I find most interesting, and what I would think that we are trying to all do in South Sudan, is something more like a system development network. And this is about long-term commitment to create new social systems. All right. Now, I want to stop here and make a comment about the change or the difference between advocacy networks and systems change networks. Okay, because most of us, me including, it's very easy for us to participate in advocacy networks, right? Because the purpose is clear and the results are visible, right? So if I'm in an advocacy network for ending violence against women, I may participate in a march. I may sign up for a letter to the government. I might be visible on the news. Okay, so it's very easy for us to jump and be part of advocacy networks, and they are great. They are important to raise the awareness. But I ask, is it always put your cell phone on mute when you're doing these kinds of things? So what I'm really interested in is not only to be part of advocacy networks, but also be part of the large systems change. For example, well, what does it mean to end violence against women? Well, a systems change network could be focusing on, identifying and working with women entrepreneurs and help them to start and run successful businesses that offer them financial independence, right? So, but this is a long-term process because you need to find the funders, you need to find the women, you need to find the training, and this is a process that takes many, many years. Okay. Advocacy for the end of conflict or the end of war is extremely important, but the long-term process of change is, for example, creating the conditions to engage in meaningful conversations about what are the root causes of the war, of what are the root causes of our fighting, right? And how can we work them in order for, in the long term, that fighting is obsolete. It doesn't make any sense for us to fight, okay? Or ending corruption, right? I can go, and there is a lot of talk about corruption here in Portugal right now, but and I can be have a very active voice against corruption, but maybe I should also work on trying to understand if our justice system is holding our politicians accountable. Um, so, for example, what you guys are doing with TTT is a good example of um, of an activity from a systems change network, because you are, creating and hosting new social spaces, where random people can meet regularly in an open and inclusive environment and creative environment, and just have people talk, right? It's as simple as that. And by maintaining these regularly, you are creating the conditions for a new system to emerge, right? The same goes for the work that is being done by Team 3 on the people working with people with disabilities, which is giving them voice, slowly giving them voice and bringing them, out to the TTT, and talking about that on the public radio, and raising awareness, slowly raising awareness. Right? These are great examples of actions done by a network, right, that may trigger a larger systems change.